Hello, you precious little muffin. What the Quest Fantasy has been dead for about 15 years, though no one has an exact date as to when it ended. And yet here, in 2022, the Quest is coming back, and Vox Machina is making it happen. That may seem like a drastic reaction to the state of things, but I honestly think that Vox Machina is reviving a dead genre. Here's why. The Critical Role TV show stands atop the shoulders of giants. Dragonlance, Shannara, and even Lord of the Rings itself. And it manages to feel more like a peer than it does a ripoff. So how exactly is it that the Critical Role TV series has managed it? Well, first we need to take a look at the Quest genre, what it is, what it has been, and why it died. Quest Fantasy has some strong relations to classic works of literature. Works like The Odyssey, Arabian Nights, and Journey to the West show a lot of common DNA with modern quest fiction. As a matter of fact, there was even a primitive tabletop RPG invented in the late Renaissance as a game adaptation of an epic poem called Orlando Furioso. If you're interested in that game and that topic, I actually have a video about it. I will link it at the end of this video, so stick to the end. However, the modern quest genre relies much less on the ancient works, and much more on the works of Tolkien. It's unsurprising. So much of modern fantasy was influenced by Tolkien. He's why we write about elves and dwarves and orcs and such the way that we do. The majority of modern fantasy can be pretty accurately described as Tolkien-esque. Yet, quest fantasy is very much the most Tolkien-esque of Tolkien-esque fantasy. The focus in this genre is mostly on two things: the world and the fellowship, often renamed to the party. All of Dungeons & Dragons spawned out of this genre. And while quest fantasy has been mostly dead in literature and film for ages, it's never died in gaming, be it tabletop or video games. Now, there was a popular work titled Rhetorics of Fantasy by Farah Mendlesohn in 2008 that describes quest or portal fiction as being primarily focused on exploring the world, usually with the help of a guide. The world itself being more or less the main character, so to speak. I bring this up because it's usually touted as being the definition of quest fantasy, but I don't think that's truly accurate. Mendelssohn's essay was more about types of storytelling than it was about genre, and I think there are plenty of non-quest books that explore their worlds in the way that Mendelssohn describes. And on the other hand, plenty of blatant quest books that don't. Tal'Dorei is, after all, in no way the main character of Vox Machina, and the world of Krynn was not the main character of Dragonlance. For a more colloquial definition, let's just call quest fiction to mean fantasy world, a journey across it, and a found family you're bringing along the way. Anything stricter than that, and we start disqualifying things that probably shouldn't be disqualified. Now, we need to talk about a media juggernaut that spawned out of D&D. A game of story that grew to become an entire franchise, inspiring thousands of fans to pick up a dice bag for the first time and get playing. A game which eventually became a cartoon with CGI dragons. Yeah, I'm talking about Dragonlance. Why? What did you think I was talking about? Before we go forwards, let me just say, hey, thanks for watching. If you like it when I talk about stuff like this, then the best way that you can support me and the channel is actually just to scroll on down below, leave a like on the video, and if you could just leave a comment about your favorite work of quest fantasy, then that really goes a long way. Alright, thanks folks, let's get back to the video. Dragonlance and Critical Role are very much parallels of one another. And it's kind of weird that no one's talking about that. If I had to guess, it's mostly a generational divide. Older and younger players see their D&D media of choice as fundamentally different. But, they're not really that different. In 20 years, the new generation will look back and think both of them are old, crusty, and outdated. Okay, so what exactly was Dragonlance? And why am I even bringing it up? Dragonlance was originally conceived of as an official campaign setting for Dungeons & Dragons by Tracy Hickman. The team working on the setting thought it would be best to accompany it with a line of books that ended up being co-written by Margaret Weiss and Tracy Hickman. No one had any idea that the novels would grow to be such a smash hit, selling 3 million copies by 1998. Dragonlance is set in the world of Krynn, and the original trilogy follows the story of a world where the gods had disappeared. The party was made of a number of beloved characters, including Tanis Half-Elven, who manages to be both Vex and Vax at the same time, Tass and Flint, who accompanied 95% of the party's banter and humor, and the eternally brooding Raistlin Mahir and his tragic relationship with his well-meaning brother, Karamon. As a group, they head on an epic, world-shattering quest to bring the gods back and protect the world from the newly returned dragonflights. The story was considered, even by contemporary accounts and reviews at the time, to not be very original, but was considered to be an extremely well-crafted work of quest fiction, even if it was a little derivative. It was certainly Tolkien-esque, but the new fellowship was created by people who'd been playing D&D, and had some experience at making some of those old tropes feel, lived in, more than Tolkien's fellowship anyway. And the audience loved it, and they really connected with these characters. All of those things are basically true of the Legends of Vox Machina as well. Is there anything in Vox Machina that you haven't seen before? Not really. Campaign 1 was widely considered to be the most reliant on tropes, but that really doesn't get in the way. Quest fiction is a finely tuned machine. The fact that they're all so similar isn't a bug, it's a feature. People love the formula. And once you're hooked on quests, it's incredibly easy to binge like 100 of them. The characters feel easy to love, and the structure is a great way to get to know the cast. There's a lot of stuff that really resonates with people in the basic structure. Adventurers are, after all, outcasts, and an adventuring party is a found family. It's a timeless story. And we've had those stories for literally thousands of years. But there is a problem with such a bingeable genre that sticks to a formula so tightly. Eventually, you kinda just get tired of it. And that's what happened en masse sometime in the 2000s. There were too many works of quest fiction. There was too much Dragonlance. Nearly 300 books of it, in fact. There was only so much that people could read before the entire fan base, myself included, began to leave the genre behind in exhausted droves. There is no set date when it happened, but I did find a forum post from 2008 when everyone largely agreed that the genre had begun to heavily fade away from the fantasy consumer's consciousness. The last Dragonlance book was published in 2011. They had entertained and influenced tabletop fans and fantasy geeks alike for 27 long years. And with that, the genre died. But not forever. Vox Machina is still airing at time of writing. We don't have sales figures yet, but nearly everyone I know in the TTRPG community is watching, whether they're critters or not. Time will tell if this is going to hit a wider audience, but I suspect it will draw in plenty of new people. When I was watching, I began to notice something very particular. Everything was feeling fresh again. As I said before, the Vox Machina campaign was the most trope-heavy of the Critical Role campaigns. And yet, all of these tropes that we've seen constantly used and reused in old works of quest fantasy, well, they didn't feel so tired anymore. I made a video recently where I watched the terrible Dragonlance cartoon a few weeks back, and I remarked at the time how surprised I was that for all its faults, this classic fantasy quest no longer felt as outdated story-wise as it did when I first watched as a teenager. Now, seeing a modern telling of quest fantasy put to screen, I feel that same old pull, that old drive to read 100 quest books on repeat. Just like Dragonlance before it, Vox Machina is telling an old story in ways that rings true for a new audience. If you love Legend of Vox Machina, I'm not telling you to go read the original Dragonlance books. It will probably still feel old and tired. It was written for a different fantasy generation. The Legend of Vox Machina, however, is a quest for our time. The medium's different, the characters are different, some of the tropes and the humor is more in focus than an old fantasy. But, let's not kid ourselves. This thing's got Dragonlance DNA in it. It's the 3.0 version of quest fantasy. It's not a different beast. In fact, the harder you look for ways to separate it from old quest fiction, the harder it gets to actually justify it. It's more diverse, and it's funnier. But that's pretty much it. I hope this story will fire up a lot of people to get into quest fiction, because it feels like we're standing on the precipice of another golden age. Dragonlance is even coming back later this year, and we're absolutely going to be covering the book on this channel when it comes out. I reckon it'll be another great in to the modern quest genre, perhaps even blending new and old in a great way. In Dragonlance, the gods, it turned out, never left humanity. It was humanity who left the gods. Quest fiction hasn't gone anywhere. It's always been the go-to for fantasy and gaming, and there have been countless attempts at publishing quest stories. The ones that have been successful have usually been subversions. The Witcher is less about a party and more about the character study of Geralt and the relationships he forms along the way. Percy Jackson is a quest fantasy set in the modern world. The First Law is a grimdark quest fantasy. The quest has always been appealing, even if we needed some subversions to get us to come back to the genre. But with Vox Machina, for the first time in years, I see a straight quest fantasy that's absolutely killing it. There's no twist. It's just a quest, done very well with a great cast. Like the gods of Dragonlance, quest fiction never left us. We were the ones who left it, and now, I think it's time to come home. Thank you so much for watching, everybody. As I said, I have a video about a 400-year-old tabletop RPG based off of a work of ancient quest fantasy, and it will be somewhere up on screen. And I also last week covered exactly why I think the Legend of Vox Machina works so well. So that will also be on screen somewhere. So if you want to see more of me, then, make the clickety-clackety happen. See you next week.